I stood in the center of the Harborview conference room, water dripping from my hair and soaking through my blouse, the expensive Persian rug beneath my feet darkening with each drop. My mother held an empty crystal pitcher in her perfectly manicured hands, her chest heaving with anger. My father sat behind his mahogany desk, arms folded across his custom suit, his face carved from stone. Brandon leaned against the floor-to-ceiling windows, his reflection sharp against the Seattle skyline, wearing that smirk he'd perfected since we were kids. The check they'd slid across the table moments before the water hit my face sat there mocking me. $250,000. My signature line waiting at the bottom like an open grave. "Pay us back," my father had said, his voice cold enough to freeze the rain outside. "For everything we invested in you. Everything you squandered." I didn't reach for a towel. I didn't wipe my face. I just smiled, slow and deliberate, because tucked inside my jacket pocket was a single key. And what that key unlocked was going to shatter everything they thought they knew. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The meeting had started calmly enough, which should have been my first warning. My father never invited me anywhere without a reason, and calm was just another strategy in his playbook. The email had arrived 3 days earlier. Subject line blank, message brief. Family meeting Thursday 4 p.m. Harborview conference room. Attendance mandatory. I almost deleted it. Almost. But something about the timing felt deliberate. Grandpa Jimmy had passed away 2 weeks before, and the funeral had been a study in controlled grief. My mother in black Chanel dabbing at dry eyes. My father shaking hands like he was closing deals. Brandon on his phone half the time, probably texting his latest girlfriend or checking stock prices. I'd stood apart from them near the back watching the small crowd that had gathered. Most were business associates, people who knew my grandfather only as James Chan, successful contractor, generous donor to local charities. They didn't know Jimmy, the man who taught me how to mix concrete when I was 7, who took me to construction sites on Saturdays and let me wear a hard hat 3 sizes too big. They didn't know the man who slipped me $20 bills and told me to buy something that made me smile, not something practical. The conference room smelled like leather and ambition, the kind of space designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of Elliott Bay, the ferries cutting white lines across gray water. Rain streaked the glass, blurring the city into watercolor impressions. I'd arrived exactly on time, not early enough to seem eager, not late enough to give them ammunition. My mother was already seated, scrolling through her phone, probably scheduling her next wellness retreat or meditation workshop. She'd reinvented herself 5 years ago after my father's business exploded in value, trading country club lunches for green smoothies and yoga retreats. She still spent money like water, just with better branding now. Brandon stood by the coffee station, pouring himself a cup from the French press, adding cream with the precision of someone who'd been trained to perform every action with confidence. He was 32, 4 years older than me, and he'd spent every one of those extra years reminding me that he was the heir apparent, the one who understood the family business, the one who mattered. My father entered last because of course he did. Robert Chun believed in entrances, in making people wait just long enough to remember who held the power. He wore a charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, no tie because ties were for people who needed to prove something. He'd built Chen and Associates from the ground up, leveraging my grandfather's modest contracting success into a real estate empire that stretched across the Pacific Northwest. Luxury condos, commercial developments, urban renewal projects that displaced as many people as they housed. He was good at what he did and he knew it. "Sit down, Maya," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "We have something to discuss." I sat, keeping my expression neutral. My mother finally looked up from her phone, her lips pressed into that thin line that meant disapproval. Brandon leaned against the wall, coffee cup in hand, watching like this was entertainment. "Your grandfather," my father began, folding his hands on the desk, "left behind some complications." I waited. He had a way of turning everything into a negotiation, every conversation into a transaction. As you know, he was involved in several properties over the years, some of which became quite valuable. I knew where this was going, but I let him continue. "When you decided to pursue your little art career," he paused on the word art like it tasted bitter, "we supported you. We paid for your education, your apartment, your expenses. We invested in your future. My mother nodded along, as if this was a rehearsed script. And now my father continued, leaning forward slightly, it's time for you to honor that investment. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a breakdown of expenses spanning 10 years. College tuition, rent payments, car insurance, medical bills, even groceries and utilities. Every dollar they'd ever spent on me, itemized and calculated. At the bottom, a total. $250,000. You're joking, I said, my voice steady despite the anger rising in my chest. We don't joke about money, my mother said, finally speaking. You made choices, Maya. Choices that didn't align with this family's values. You walked away from business school. You rejected the opportunities your father created for you. You chose to be a graphic designer. She said it like I'd chosen to be a criminal. And now, my father said, retrieving the folder and replacing it with a single sheet of paper, we're asking you to take responsibility. The paper was a promissory note, my name printed at the top, the amount bold and unforgiving. You want me to pay you back for raising me, I said slowly. For being your daughter. For existing. Brandon laughed, short and sharp. Don't be dramatic. This is business. You benefited from family resources. Now you settle the account. I looked at each of them, searching for some hint of humanity, some crack in the facade. Nothing. My mother's face was smooth, Botox perfect. My father's expression was carved granite. Brandon just looked amused. And if I refuse? I asked. My father leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. Then we'll pursue legal action. We have documentation, receipts, bank transfers. Everything we spent on you was effectively a loan, and loans get repaid. Plus, he added, almost as an afterthought, there's the matter of your grandfather's estate. We've been informed that he left certain assets in your name. Assets that rightfully belong to the family. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What assets? That's not your concern right now, my mother said. What matters is that you sign this document and begin making arrangements for repayment. We're willing to set up a payment plan. 10 years, monthly installments. Very reasonable. I stared at the paper, at my name printed there like a sentencing. This is insane. This is business, my father corrected. And you're either part of this family or you're not. Choose. The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in. Rain hammered against the windows, the sound filling the silence that stretched between us. I thought about Grandpa Jimmy, about the last conversation we'd had before he got sick. He'd taken me to the original Chun house in Ballard, the one he'd built with his own hands in the 1960s. We'd sat on the porch drinking tea, watching the neighborhood transform around us. New condos rising where old shops used to be, coffee places replacing corner stores. This house, he'd said, gesturing with his cup, your father wants me to sell it. Says it's sitting on a gold mine. Developers are circling, offering crazy money. I'd asked him why he didn't sell, why he stayed in a neighborhood that was pricing out everyone who'd built it. Because some things aren't about money, he'd said. Some things are about remembering who you are. He'd looked at me then, really looked at me, and said something I hadn't understood at the time. I'm making sure you remember too. When the time comes, you'll know what to do. I stood up, the chair scraping against the floor. I need time to think about this. You have until Monday, my father said. Sign the note or we file suit Tuesday morning. And Maya, he added as I turned toward the door, don't think about running to some lawyer. We have the best legal team in the city. This is a courtesy conversation. The smart move is to cooperate. I walked to the door, my hand on the handle, when my mother's voice stopped me. One more thing. She stood, smoothing her dress, and walked to a side table where a crystal pitcher of water sat sweating in the heated room. You've always been ungrateful. Always thought you were special, different, better than the family that gave you everything. She lifted the pitcher. And for a second I didn't understand what was happening. Then the water hit me, cold and shocking, soaking through my clothes and running down my face. That's what we think of your choices, she said, setting the pitcher down with a soft clink. That's what we think of you. Brandon laughed again, louder this time. My father just watched, his expression unchanged. I stood there, dripping, feeling the water pool in my shoes trickle down my spine. And something in me shifted, settled, hardened into something unbreakable. I smiled, slow and deliberate, reached into my jacket pocket, and felt the small brass key Grandpa Jimmy had given me 3 months before he died. They thought they held all the cards. They thought I was cornered, desperate, alone. They had no idea what was coming. "I'll see you Monday," I said quietly and walked out, leaving a trail of water behind me like breadcrumbs leading back to their mistake. I drove back to Capitol Hill in silence, my clothes still damp, the heater in my old Honda struggling against the cold that had settled into my bones. The windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm, clearing rain that fell harder now, turning the city into smeared lights and shadows. My hands gripped the steering wheel tight enough that my knuckles went white, but my mind was surprisingly calm. The shock had worn off somewhere between the elevator and the parking garage, replaced by something sharper, something that felt like clarity. They'd shown me exactly who they were, and more importantly, they'd shown me they were scared. People who hold all the power don't throw water. They don't need theatrical displays of dominance. They don't demand $250,000 payments from daughters they claimed to have disowned years ago. They were afraid of something, and that something had to do with Grandpa Jimmy and whatever he'd left behind. My apartment was exactly as I'd left it that morning, small and cluttered with the organized chaos of someone who actually lived in their space rather than staged it. Plants lined the windowsill, some thriving, some barely hanging on, all of them rescues from the grocery store clearance section. My desk was covered in design proofs for a local brewery's rebrand, sketches and color swatches scattered across the surface. A half-finished mug of coffee sat next to my laptop, cold now, a ring staining the wood beneath it. I dropped my bag by the door, peeled off my wet jacket, and stood in the middle of the room, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle over me like a second skin. The key was still in my pocket, warm from my body heat, small and brass and unremarkable. Grandpa Jimmy had pressed it into my palm during one of his last good days, when he was still lucid between the pain medication and the fog of illness. We'd been alone in his hospital room, the machines beeping their steady surveillance, monitoring a body that was shutting down despite everyone's best efforts. He'd held my hand, his grip surprisingly strong, and placed the key there with the deliberation of someone performing a ritual. "Pioneer Storage," he'd said, his voice rough but clear. "Unit 42. Everything you need is there." I tried to ask what he meant, but he'd shaken his head, squeezed my hand tighter. "Don't tell them. Not your father, not your mother, not Brandon. Especially not Brandon." He closed my fingers around the key. "They're going to come after you. After I'm gone, they're going to try to take everything. But I made sure you'd have what you need to fight back." I hadn't understood then. I thought maybe he was confused, mixing up memories, seeing threats that didn't exist. But he'd been perfectly clear, perfectly aware. "Promise me, Maya. Promise you won't open it until they make their move. You'll know when." I'd promised, tucked the key away, and tried not to think about what it meant that my grandfather was preparing me for war with my own family. Now, standing in my apartment with water still dripping from my hair, I understood. This was the move he'd warned me about. The promissory note, the itemized expenses, the legal threats. This was them showing their hand, and it was time for me to see what cards Grandpa Jimmy had dealt me. I changed into dry clothes, made fresh coffee, and sat at my desk with my laptop open. The key sat next to my mouse, catching the light from my desk lamp. Before I went to the storage unit, I needed to understand what I was walking into. I pulled up the email from my father, read it again, looking for details I'd missed. Family meeting. Attendance mandatory. Nothing about the purpose, nothing about Grandpa Jimmy's estate. That alone was suspicious. My father ran his life like he ran his business. Every meeting had an agenda. Every conversation had a goal. The vagueness was intentional, designed to keep me off balance, unprepared. I opened a new browser tab and searched for information about estate law in Washington state, about inheritance rights and family obligations. The results were dense, full of legal language that blurred together, but a few things stood out. Adult children had no automatic legal obligation to repay parents for their upbringing. Trying to enforce such a claim would be difficult, potentially impossible, unless there was documented agreement of loans rather than gifts. My father had mentioned documentation, receipts, bank transfers. Had they really kept records of every dollar spent on me, or was that a bluff? I spent 2 hours going through old emails, searching for any communication about money, any indication that what they'd given me was considered a loan rather than parental support. Nothing. Every tuition payment had come with lectures about responsibility and gratitude, but never with terms, never with interest rates or repayment schedules. Every rent check had arrived with criticism about my choices, but never with documentation suggesting I was accruing debt. If they wanted to claim I owed them money, they'd have to prove intent to create a debtor relationship, and from what I could find in my records, that proof didn't exist. Which meant the promissory note was pressure, not legitimate legal action. They wanted me to sign away my rights to something to acknowledge a debt that would give them leverage. But leverage for what? I pulled up property records for King County, typed in my grandfather's name. The results loaded slowly, my internet struggling against the storm that was hammering the city. When the page finally resolved, I stared at the screen, reading the information twice to make sure I understood what I was seeing. James Chun owned 6 properties in Seattle. 6. The house in Ballard I knew about, the one he'd built and lived in for 50 years. But there were 5 others scattered across the city, all purchased decades ago when the neighborhoods were working class and affordable. Beacon Hill, Georgetown, Columbia City, Lake City, Greenwood. Every single one of them was now in areas that had exploded in value, where developers were buying up old houses and building luxury townhomes, where tech workers were flooding in and displacing everyone who'd built the community. Grandpa Jimmy had quietly assembled a real estate portfolio that had to be worth millions. And according to the county records, every single property was held in a trust. The James Chun Family Trust. I clicked through to the trust documents, public record filed years ago. The trust had been established in 1998, with James Chun as trustee. Upon his death, control would pass to a successor trustee, someone he'd named in the trust paperwork. I scrolled down looking for the name, my heart hammering against my ribs. Successor trustee. In the event of James Chun's death or incapacitation, trustee powers transfer to Maya Lin Chun. My name. Right there in legal language filed with the county more than 25 years ago. I would have been 3 years old when he created this trust, barely able to write my own name, and he'd already decided I would be the one to inherit control. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Not my father. Not Brandon. Me. I sat back in my chair, coffee forgotten, staring at the screen. This was what they wanted. This was why they'd ambushed me with the promissory note and the threats and the theatrics. Grandpa Jimmy's estate hadn't been fully settled yet, and they were trying to leverage me into signing away my rights before I understood what I had. If I signed that promissory note, acknowledging a debt I couldn't possibly pay, they could use it to argue I was financially unstable, unable to manage the trust, unfit to serve as trustee. They could petition the court to have me removed and replaced with someone more responsible. Someone like my father. The whole thing was a setup, carefully constructed, timed to hit me while I was grieving, before I had a chance to talk to lawyers or understand my rights. They'd counted on me being overwhelmed, isolated, desperate enough to cooperate. But Grandpa Jimmy had known. He'd known exactly what they'd do, and he'd prepared for it. The key in my pocket suddenly felt heavier, more significant. If the trust was public record, then whatever was in that storage unit was something else, something he'd kept private, hidden, protected. I checked the time. Almost 7. The storage facility's office would be closed, but the units were accessible 24 hours with a key code. I could go now tonight, see what he'd left for me. But something made me hesitate. If my family was watching me, and after that performance today I had to assume they were, showing up at a storage unit the same evening they tried to intimidate me into signing away my rights would be suspicious. They'd follow me, see where I went, potentially interfere before I understood what I was dealing with. I needed to be smarter than that. I needed to act like someone who'd been defeated, who was considering their options, who didn't know about the trust or the properties or the fact that I held cards they desperately wanted to take away. I closed the laptop, finished my coffee, and walked to the window. The rain had eased into mist. The kind of Seattle weather that wasn't quite rain but left everything damp and shining. Across the street, a silver sedan was parked with its engine running, exhaust puffing into the cold air. I'd noticed it when I came home, hadn't thought much of it then. But it was still there, and nobody sat in a running car for 3 hours in this weather unless they had a reason. I stepped back from the window, careful not to make it obvious I'd noticed. My apartment was on the third floor, good visibility of the street, which meant good visibility into my apartment if someone was watching with the right equipment. I grabbed my phone, opened the Notes app, and typed out everything I'd learned. The trust, the properties, the successor trustee designation. If something happened to me, if my family escalated beyond legal threats, I wanted a record. I emailed the notes to myself, then to 3 different email addresses I use for backup. Then I called the one person I trusted to tell me if I was being paranoid or appropriately cautious. Vanessa Park answered on the second ring, her voice bright despite the late hour. Maya, hey. What's up? I need advice, I said, keeping my voice low even though I was alone. Legal advice. The brightness dimmed. What happened? I gave her the abbreviated version. The meeting, the promissory note, the threats, the water. I left out the trust and the storage unit not because I didn't trust Vanessa, but because the fewer people who knew, the safer that information would be. Vanessa had been my roommate in college before she went to law school and I went to design school. Before our paths diverged, but our friendship remained. She worked at a small firm now, doing family law and estate planning, exactly the kind of expertise I needed. That's insane, she said when I finished. They can't actually enforce a claim like that. Not without proving the money was loaned with expectation of repayment. Do they have documentation? They claim they do, I said. But I've been through my emails, my records. I never signed anything, never agreed to terms. Everything was just given to me like normal parental support. Then they're bluffing, Vanessa said firmly. Or they're hoping you don't know enough to call their bluff. Either way, don't sign anything. Don't acknowledge any debt. If they file suit, we'll fight it and we'll win. What about my grandfather's estate? I asked carefully. Could they use this to interfere with inheritance? Vanessa was quiet for a moment. If you're named in the will, they'd need grounds to contest it. Being in debt wouldn't be enough. But if they could argue you're financially irresponsible or unfit to manage assets, that might give them an opening. They'd still have to prove it in court, and that's an uphill battle. But it could tie things up, delay distribution, create complications. Exactly what I'd thought. They didn't need to win. They just needed to create enough chaos to maintain control. Have you talked to the estate lawyer? Vanessa asked. Do you know what your grandfather left you? Not yet, I lied. The will reading is scheduled for next week. Okay, Vanessa said. Here's what you do. Don't respond to their demands. Don't sign anything. Don't engage. If they contact you again, forward everything to me. In the meantime, talk to the estate attorney, understand your rights, and document everything. If they're watching you, if they're following you, that's harassment. We can use that. I felt some of the tension ease from my shoulders. Thank you, Vanessa. I mean it. That's what friends are for, she said. And Maya, seriously, be careful. If they're desperate enough to try something this aggressive, they might escalate. Make sure you're safe. I promised I would be, ended the call and looked back at the window. The silver sedan was gone, but that didn't mean much. They could have switched vehicles, moved to a different location, decided I wasn't going anywhere interesting tonight. I made dinner, leftover Thai food reheated in the microwave, ate it standing at the counter while scrolling through my phone. Social media was full of people living their curated lives, posting about promotions and vacations and perfect moments. My mother's wellness account showed her latest post. A photo of her in lotus position overlooking some beach at sunset, caption about finding peace through letting go of toxic relationships. The comments were full of support, people praising her wisdom, her strength, her journey. None of them knew she'd thrown water at her daughter 6 hours earlier. I put the phone down, washed my dishes, and tried to pretend this was a normal evening. But normal had evaporated the moment that water hit my face, and I wasn't sure it was ever coming back. The key sat on my desk, waiting, and I knew that tomorrow I'd have to use it. Tomorrow I'd have to see what Grandpa Jimmy had hidden away, what ammunition he'd left me for this fight. But tonight I just needed to breathe, to think, to prepare for whatever came next. I changed into pajamas, brushed my teeth, went through the motions of routine. But when I climbed into bed and turned off the lights, sleep didn't come easily. I lay there in the dark, listening to the city sounds filtering through the window, the distant sirens and car engines and voices of people walking home from bars. I thought about my grandfather, about the trust he'd placed in me decades before I was old enough to understand what trust meant. I thought about my family, about how money and property could turn people into strangers, How blood meant nothing when real estate meant millions. And I thought about Monday, about the deadline they'd given me, about how they expected me to show up defeated and ready to cooperate. They were going to be disappointed. The next morning dawned gray and wet, typical Seattle spring weather that couldn't decide between rain and sun. I woke early, made coffee, and forced myself to eat breakfast even though my stomach was tight with anticipation. The key was where I'd left it, on my desk, and I picked it up while I drank my coffee, feeling the weight of it, the promise it represented. Pioneer Storage was in the industrial district south of downtown, a sprawling complex of orange and white buildings surrounded by chain-link fencing. I'd driven past it 100 times, never paying attention, never knowing my grandfather had hidden something there. I needed to go today, before Monday's deadline, before whatever my family had planned next. But I also needed to be careful, to make sure I wasn't followed, to keep this secret until I understood what I was protecting. I spent an hour mapping out a route, planning stops, ways to check if anyone was tailing me. I felt ridiculous, like I was in a spy movie, but Vanessa's warning echoed in my head. If they're desperate enough to try something this aggressive, they might escalate. I dressed in jeans and a hoodie, grabbed my backpack and headed out, ready to discover what my grandfather had left behind, ready to understand why my family was so desperate to keep me from finding it. I took the long way to Pioneer Storage, driving through neighborhoods I didn't need to visit, stopping at a coffee shop in Fremont where I sat by the window nursing a latte I didn't want, watching the street for any sign of the silver sedan or unfamiliar cars that lingered too long. Nothing stood out, but that didn't mean I was alone. After 40 minutes I left, took a deliberately confusing route through residential streets, doubled back twice, and finally pointed my Honda south toward the industrial district. The storage facility sat between a tire shop and a wholesale plumbing supplier, the kind of area where businesses operated behind chain link, and nobody asked questions about why you needed access to your unit at odd hours. The main gate required a code, which I didn't have, but a delivery truck was pulling out as I arrived and I slipped through behind it, trying to look like I belonged there. The facility was larger than it appeared from the street, rows of identical orange doors stretching in every direction, numbers painted in white block letters above each unit. I drove slowly, following the signs toward the 40s, my heart rate picking up with each turn. Unit 42 was in the back corner, away from the main office, tucked between a drainage ditch and the facility's rear fence. Privacy, I realized. Grandpa Jimmy had chosen a location where someone could come and go without being easily observed from the street or office. I parked directly in front of the unit, killed the engine, and sat for a moment, gathering my nerve. The key felt slick in my palm, warm from being clenched too tight. Around me the facility was quiet, just the distant sound of traffic on the highway and the metallic tick of my cooling engine. I got out, approached the unit, and slid the key into the padlock. It turned smoothly, well-oiled, recently used. The lock fell open and I lifted the rolling door, metal scraping against metal, revealing darkness that smelled like cardboard and dust and something else, something that reminded me of my grandfather's workshop. I found the light switch just inside the door, fluorescent tubes flickering to life and illuminating a space about 10 feet by 10 feet, climate-controlled and surprisingly organized. Metal shelving lined 2 walls, plastic bins stacked and labeled in my grandfather's careful handwriting. A small wooden desk sat in the corner, the kind with multiple drawers and a surface scarred from decades of use. I recognized it from his workshop, remembered doing homework there as a kid while he worked on projects, the smell of sawdust and coffee mixing in the air. On the desk sat a single cardboard file box, my name written across the top in black marker. Maya. Nothing else, just my name, like he'd known exactly when I'd find it, like he'd been waiting for this moment as much as I had. I stepped inside, pulled the door down behind me for privacy, and approached the desk with the feeling that I was stepping across a threshold into something I couldn't undo. The file box wasn't sealed, just closed with interlocking flaps, and I opened it with shaking hands. Inside were folders, at least a dozen of them, each labeled with dates and locations. I pulled out the first one, dated 2 years ago, labeled Beacon Hill Property. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, showing my father and Brandon meeting with men in expensive suits. The photos were taken from a distance, but the faces were clear, the body language unmistakable. Business meetings, deals being made. I flipped through them, confused about why my grandfather would photograph my father's business dealings, until I reached the documents tucked behind the photos. property transfer agreements signed by my father, selling the Beacon Hill house that according to public records still belonged to the James Chun Family Trust. The sale had happened 8 months ago, the buyer a development company I didn't recognize, the amount listed as $4.2 million. But the house still showed as trust property in the county records, which meant the sale was either fraudulent or the records hadn't been updated. I set that folder aside and opened the next one. Georgetown property dated 18 months ago. Same pattern. Photos of meetings, transfer documents, sale agreements. This time for $3.8 million. Another property that supposedly still belonged to the trust. My hands weren't shaking anymore. They were steady now, certain, as I opened folder after folder and found the same story repeated. My father had been selling my grandfather's properties, forging trust documents, pocketing millions of dollars from assets he didn't own. 5 properties sold over the past 3 years, nearly $20 million in fraudulent transactions. And my grandfather had documented every single one. The photos alone were damaging, but combined with the forged documents, the inconsistencies between the sales and the public records, this was evidence of systematic theft. This was fraud on a scale that could destroy my father's business, send him to prison, unravel everything he'd built. I sat down in my grandfather's chair, the reality of what I'd found settling over me like weight. Grandpa Jimmy had known. He'd known for years what my father was doing, and instead of confronting him, instead of calling the police or exposing him publicly, he'd quietly documented everything and waited. Waited for the right moment, the right person to give this evidence to. He'd given it to me. I opened the desk drawers, finding more files, more documentation. Bank statements showing deposits into my father's personal accounts that corresponded with the property sales. Email printouts showing conversations between my father and Brandon discussing the sales, referring to the properties casually, like they owned them outright. Corporate documents for the development companies that had purchased the houses, showing my father as a partial owner, meaning he'd sold the properties to himself through shell companies. The level of planning, the deliberate fraud was staggering. And through all of it, my grandfather's meticulous documentation tracked every step. The bottom drawer held something different, a leather journal, the kind with unlined pages and a strap that buckled closed. I opened it and recognized my grandfather's handwriting immediately, the same careful script from the letters he used to leave me when I was younger. The first entry was dated 5 years ago. I discovered today that Robert has sold the Columbia City house. I don't know how he managed to forge the trust documents, but the sale went through and the money disappeared into his company accounts. I should have seen this coming. I knew he was angry that I made Maya the successor trustee, but I didn't think he'd resort to theft. I kept reading page after page of entries documenting my grandfather's growing awareness of the fraud, his investigation into the extent of it, his decision to gather evidence rather than confront. One entry from 3 years ago stood out. Robert came to see me today. Demanded I change the trust, make him the successor trustee. Said I was being foolish leaving everything to Maya. That she doesn't understand business, doesn't appreciate what the family has built. I refused. He threatened to have me declared incompetent, to take control of the trust through the courts. I told him to try. He doesn't know I've been watching him, doesn't know I have proof of what he's done. Let him think he's winning. Maya will have what she needs when the time comes. Tears burned in my eyes, but I blinked them back, kept reading. My grandfather had protected me, even knowing it might cost him, even as his own son stole from him. He'd chosen me over his son, over the easy path, over the temptation to believe family loyalty meant anything when millions of dollars were at stake. The final entry was dated 2 weeks before he went into the hospital for the last time. I'm running out of time. The cancer is moving faster than the doctors expected. I need to make sure Maya has everything she needs before I can't help her anymore. The storage unit is ready, the key is ready. She just needs to know when to use it. Robert will move fast once I'm gone. He'll try to intimidate her, threaten her, maybe worse. But she's stronger than he thinks. She's always been the strong one. The one who could walk away from everything and build her own life. That's why I chose her. That's why she'll win. I closed the journal, set it gently on the desk and let myself cry. Not from sadness, though there was plenty of that, but from gratitude, from the overwhelming weight of being seen, being trusted, being loved enough that someone would spend their final months protecting you from their own family. Grandpa Jimmy had known exactly what would happen, and he'd prepared for every move. The promissory note, the threats, the deadline. He'd predicted all of it, and he'd given me the ammunition to fight back. I spent the next hour going through every file, every document, photographing everything with my phone, backing it up to cloud storage with passwords my family could never guess. I organized the evidence chronologically, created a timeline of the fraud, matched sale dates with deposits and corporate filings. By the time I finished, I had a complete picture of a decade-long scheme to systematically steal millions of dollars from a trust my father was never supposed to control. And I had proof, irrefutable and damning, enough to destroy him. I packed everything back into the file box, added the journal on top and sealed it closed. This wasn't something I could leave here anymore. If my family suspected I'd found evidence, if they somehow discovered this storage unit, they might try to destroy it. I needed to keep it with me, or better yet, make copies and store them somewhere safe. I was loading the box into my car when my phone rang, the screen showing my brother's name. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "What do you want, Brandon?" I said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Just checking in," he said, his tone falsely casual. "Dad wanted me to see if you'd thought about our conversation. About the promissory note." "It's been less than 24 hours, I said. "I have until Monday." Sure, he agreed too quickly. "We're just hoping you'll be reasonable about this. It doesn't have to be adversarial, Maya. We're family. Family doesn't itemize childhood expenses and demand repayment," I said. "Family doesn't throw water at each other in business meetings." He laughed, that same dismissive sound from the conference room. "Mom was upset. You know how she gets. Emotional. It wasn't personal. Everything they did was personal, but I didn't say that. I'll give you my answer Monday," I said. "Like we agreed." There was a pause, and when Brandon spoke again, his voice had an edge. "You're making a mistake, Maya. Dad has lawyers, resources, connections. You're one person with a graphic design business that barely pays rent. You can't win this." "We'll see," I said, and ended the call before he could respond. I drove away from the storage unit carefully, checking my mirrors obsessively, taking random turns to ensure nobody was following. The file box sat in my trunk, wrapped in a blanket, carrying enough evidence to send my father to prison and destroy everything he'd built. The power of that knowledge was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was carrying the weapon that could end this war completely. But using it meant destroying my family, publicly exposing fraud that would make headlines, sending my father and possibly Brandon to prison. It meant burning every bridge, severing every connection, becoming the person who brought down the Chun family empire. I thought I'd be ready for that. I thought the anger from yesterday, the humiliation of standing there dripping water while they smirked, would make this easy. But driving through Seattle with evidence of my father's crimes in my trunk, I felt the weight of what came next pressing down on me. This wasn't just about winning. It was about choosing who I wanted to be, what kind of person walked away from this fight. I went home, parked in my usual spot, and carried the file box up 3 flights of stairs to my apartment. Inside, I set it on my desk, next to the trust documents I printed from the county website, and stared at it all. $20 million in fraud. A decade of theft. Evidence that could end my father's freedom. And the promissory note they wanted me to sign, the threat they'd used to try to control me. I opened my laptop and started writing. Not a legal document, not evidence compilation. Just a letter, the kind my grandfather used to write me, the kind that spoke truth without worrying about consequences. "Dear Robert," I wrote, using his first name deliberately. "I found the storage unit. I found the files. I know what you've been doing for the past 10 years. I know about the properties you sold, the trust documents you forged, the millions you stole. Grandpa Jimmy knew too. He documented everything. Every meeting, every sale, every fraudulent signature. He gave it all to me. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to withdraw the promissory note. You're going to drop every threat, every legal action, every attempt to intimidate me into signing away my rights. You're going to transfer the successor trustee position to me officially, without contest, and you're going to stay far away from anything involving Grandpa Jimmy's estate." I paused, considering my next words carefully. "If you do this, if you walk away cleanly, I'll keep the evidence private. I won't file charges. I won't expose you. I won't destroy the business you built. But if you push me, if you continue this fight, if you try anything else to control or threaten or manipulate me, I will take every document, every photo, every piece of evidence to the police and the press. I will make sure the world knows exactly what Robert Chin is. A thief who stole from his own father. A fraud who built his empire on forgery. A man who valued money more than family. The choice is yours. You have until Monday. Same deadline you gave me. I read it 3 times, making sure the tone was right. Firm but not emotional. Clear about consequences without making threats I couldn't back up. Then I saved it as a draft. I wasn't ready to send it yet. Not until I'd talked to Vanessa, made sure I had copies of everything stored safely, prepared for whatever response might come. But writing it felt good. Felt like taking control back, like stepping out of the victim role they'd cast me in and becoming something else. Someone who fought back. The rest of Saturday passed in a blur of preparation. I made copies of every file, every photo, every document from the storage unit. I uploaded everything to 3 different cloud services with complex passwords. I burned copies onto USB drives and gave one to Vanessa, one to my friend Marcus who worked in IT and wouldn't ask questions, and kept one in my apartment hidden in a hollowed-out book on my shelf. I wrote a detailed explanation of everything I'd found, including the timeline of fraud and the evidence trail, and saved it in multiple locations. If something happened to me, if my family escalated beyond threats, the truth would still come out. By Sunday morning I was exhausted but ready. The file box sat in my closet, the original documents safe but accessible. The copies were distributed, backed up, protected. The letter to my father was polished and waiting to be sent. All I had to do was press send and wait for Monday. But Sunday afternoon brought something I hadn't expected. A knock on my door, tentative and soft. Not the aggressive pounding I might have associated with my father or Brandon. I checked the peephole and saw my mother standing there, alone, wearing casual clothes instead of her usual carefully curated outfits. She looked smaller somehow, older, without the armor of designer labels and professional makeup. I considered not answering, but curiosity won again. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. "What do you want, Patricia?" I said, using her first name the way she'd always insisted when I was growing up, claiming Mom felt too provincial. She flinched at my tone but didn't comment. "Can I come in? We need to talk." "We don't need to do anything," I said. "You made yourself clear on Thursday. Water speaks pretty loudly." She had the grace to look ashamed, her eyes dropping to the floor. That was wrong. I was angry. I wasn't thinking. It was cruel. Yes, I agreed. It was. Are you here to apologize? Or is this another attempt to manipulate me into signing your ridiculous promissory note? Neither, she said quietly. I'm here to warn you. I stared at her, trying to read whether this was genuine or another layer of the game. Warn me about what? She glanced down the hallway, nervous, like she expected someone to appear. Can I please come in? Just for a minute. I stepped aside, let her enter, but left the door open. She walked to the middle of my small living room, looking around at my plants and thrift store furniture and scattered art supplies, her expression unreadable. Your father is planning something, she said, turning to face me. I don't know all the details, but I heard him on the phone yesterday with his lawyer. They were talking about guardianship paperwork, about having you evaluated. I felt ice settle in my stomach. Evaluated for what? Competency, she said. He thinks if he can get a doctor to declare you mentally unstable, he can challenge your position as successor trustee. He's been documenting what he calls erratic behavior. The graphic design career, living in this apartment, staying single, keeping distance from the family. He's going to argue you're not capable of managing significant assets. That's insane, I said. I run a successful business. I pay my bills. I have friends, a life, everything a normal adult has. He knows that, my mother said. But he also knows the law gives him room to challenge if he can make a case. And he's very good at making cases. Why are you telling me this? I asked. What do you get out of warning me? She was quiet for a long moment, her hands twisting together. Because throwing water at you was the moment I realized how far we've fallen. I looked at you standing there dripping and I saw my daughter. Not a problem to solve, not an obstacle to our plans. My daughter. And I was horrified at what I'd become. I wanted to believe her. Some part of me, the part that remembered being a child and feeling loved, wanted to think she was being genuine. But I'd learned to be cautious. This could be another strategy, another angle to get me to lower my guard. Even if you mean that, I said carefully, it doesn't change what you and Dad have done. The promissory note, the threats, the years of cutting me out of the family. One moment of regret doesn't erase all of that. I know, she said. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just trying to give you information you need to protect yourself. He's meeting with the lawyer and a psychiatrist tomorrow morning. They're preparing the paperwork to file Tuesday if you don't sign the promissory note Monday. So this is still about the note, I said. You're still trying to get me to cooperate. No, she said firmly. I'm trying to help you understand what you're up against. Sign it or don't sign it, that's your choice. But either way, he's going to try to have you declared incompetent. The promissory note was just the opening move. This has always been about control of the trust. I studied her face, looking for tells, for signs this was manipulation. She looked tired, worn down in a way I'd never seen before. It's about the properties, isn't it? I said, watching her reaction. The ones Grandpa Jimmy owned. The ones in the trust. She nodded slowly. Your father has been managing them for years. Making decisions, handling tenants, collecting rent. When your grandfather made you the successor trustee, it threatened everything. Robert would lose control, lose access to the income, lose the ability to make the properties part of his development plans. Has he been selling them? I asked, even though I knew the answer. I needed to hear if she knew, if she was complicit or just willfully ignorant. Her eyes met mine, and I saw the answer there before she spoke. Yes. I didn't know at first, but over the past few years I've seen the deposits, the way he talks about deals. He sold properties that belonged to the trust and used the money for his business. It's fraud, I said flatly. He forged trust documents and stole millions of dollars. If that comes out, he goes to prison. My mother wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking cold despite the warmth of my apartment. I know. That's why he's so desperate. It's not just about money anymore. It's about keeping everything hidden, maintaining control, making sure nobody looks too closely at what he's done. And you're the threat. You're the one person who could expose everything. So what happens if I sign the note? I asked. Does he stop? Does this end? She shook her head. I don't think so. I think he'll keep pushing until you're completely out of the picture. The note is just leverage. The competency challenge is the real play. If he can get you declared unfit, he becomes trustee, controls everything, and can continue covering his tracks. And you're okay with that? I asked. You're okay with him destroying me to protect himself? She looked at me, tears forming in her eyes. No, I'm not okay with any of this. That's why I'm here. I don't know how to stop him, Maya. He's my husband, he's Brandon's father, we're all tied to his success. If he falls, we all fall. But I can't watch him destroy you to save himself. I can't be that person anymore. I wanted to feel sympathy for her. Wanted to believe this was genuine remorse and a real attempt to help. But years of distance, of feeling abandoned and discarded, made it hard to trust. What do you want me to do with this information? I asked. What am I supposed to do with the fact that my father is planning to have me declared mentally incompetent as part of covering up his crimes? Fight back, she said simply. You're stronger than he thinks. You always have been. That's why he's scared of you. Find a way to protect yourself, to expose him if you need to make sure he can't hurt you anymore. I have resources, I said carefully, not revealing what I'd found. I have options. Good, she said. Use them. Don't let him win. She moved toward the door, paused with her hand on the frame. I'm sorry, Maya. For all of it. For choosing his side. For not protecting you, for throwing that water. I'm sorry I wasn't the mother you deserved. She left before I could respond, her footsteps fading down the hallway, leaving me standing in my apartment with more questions than answers. Was she genuine, or was this another layer of manipulation? Did she really feel remorse, or was she trying to get me to reveal what I knew? I closed the door, locked it, and leaned against it, feeling the weight of everything pressing down. Tomorrow was Monday. Tomorrow I'd have to make my move. Send the letter, use the evidence, fight back with everything I had. And now I knew my father's plan, knew he was preparing to destroy my credibility, to have me declared incompetent, to eliminate me as a threat permanently. Grandpa Jimmy had given me the weapons. My mother, intentionally or not, had given me the intelligence. Now I just had to figure out how to use both without destroying myself in the process. Monday morning arrived cold and sharp, the kind of Pacific Northwest spring day where the sun pretended it might break through clouds that had no intention of parting. I woke at 5, having slept maybe 3 hours total, my mind cycling through scenarios and strategies and possible outcomes until exhaustion finally pulled me under just before dawn. The file box sat on my desk where I'd left it, a silent reminder of what I carried, what I knew, what power I held. I made coffee strong enough to taste like consequences, showered in water hot enough to feel like armor, and dressed in black pants and a gray sweater, professional without trying too hard. Someone who had their life together even if everything was falling apart. By 7 I was in my car, driving to Vanessa's office before she officially opened, using the key she'd given me years ago for emergencies. This qualified. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at her desk with case files spread across the surface, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun, reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked up when I walked in, took one look at my face, and immediately closed her laptop. What happened? Everything, I said, setting my bag down and pulling out the USB drive I'd prepared for her. I need you to look at something, and then I need you to tell me if I'm about to make the biggest mistake of my life or the smartest move I've got. She took the drive, plugged it into her computer, and spent the next 40 minutes in silence, clicking through files, reading documents, her expression growing darker with each page. When she finally sat back, she removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. Maya, this is massive. This isn't just family drama or estate disputes. This is criminal fraud. Multi-million-dollar theft. If you take this to the authorities, your father goes to prison. I know, I said. That's why I need your advice. What do I do? Vanessa was quiet for a long moment, thinking through angles and implications the way lawyers do, seeing moves and countermoves I couldn't anticipate. Here's what you need to understand, she said finally. If you use this evidence, you're not just protecting yourself. You're destroying your father's life, probably your brother's too if he's complicit. Your family will never forgive you. Whatever relationship remains, however damaged, will be permanently severed. I've already been severed, I said. They threw water at me and demanded I pay them for raising me. They're planning to have me declared mentally incompetent to steal what Grandpa Jimmy left me. There's no relationship left to protect. Maybe, Vanessa said. But there's a difference between being estranged and being the person who sent your father to prison. That's a line you can't uncross. Once you take that step, you're committed. Are you ready for that? I thought about my grandfather, about the journal entries documenting his own son's betrayal, about how he'd chosen to protect me over protecting Robert. He'd made his choice knowing what it meant, knowing it would divide the family irrevocably. He trusted me to have the strength to make the same choice. Yes, I said. I'm ready. Then here's what we do, Vanessa said, switching into lawyer mode. You don't go to the police first. You give your father one chance to walk away. You show him you have the evidence, make it clear what happens if he continues, and offer him the option to disappear quietly. No charges, no exposure, but he gives up all claims to the trust and leaves you alone permanently. Why give him that option? I asked. Why let him off when he deserves to face consequences? Because criminal prosecution takes years, Vanessa said. It's expensive, emotionally devastating, and there's always a chance something goes wrong. Evidence gets suppressed, witnesses change stories, juries are unpredictable. If your goal is to protect yourself and claim what's rightfully yours, the cleanest path is leverage. You hold the evidence, you make the terms, and you move forward with your life instead of spending the next 5 years in courtrooms. But if he refuses? I asked. If he calls my bluff and keeps fighting? Then you take everything to the King County Prosecutor's office, Vanessa said. We file a detailed report, hand over all the evidence, and let the system handle it. But we give him the choice first. That's the smart play. I left Vanessa's office with a plan and a timeline. She would draft a formal letter outlining my demands, legally worded to make clear this was a one-time offer. I would arrange a meeting with my father, somewhere public but private enough for serious conversation. I would present the evidence, give him 24 hours to decide, and then proceed accordingly. By noon I had sent the email requesting a meeting, keeping it brief and professional. We need to talk about the promissory note and the trust. Today 6 p.m. Cascade Coffee House. Come alone. His response came within 10 minutes. I'll be there. Nothing else, no questions or conditions, just agreement. That worried me more than resistance would have. My father always had an angle, always planned 3 moves ahead, and his immediate cooperation meant he thought he had leverage I didn't know about. I spent the afternoon preparing, going over the evidence again, rehearsing what I'd say, trying to anticipate his responses. Vanessa's letter sat in my bag, formally typed on law firm letterhead, outlining the terms. Withdrawal of all claims against me, transfer of trustee responsibilities, public statement that the estate disputes were resolved amicably, and most importantly, his permanent distance from anything involving my life. In exchange, I would keep the evidence of fraud private, file no charges, and allow him to maintain his business reputation. Cascade Coffee House sat in a quiet neighborhood between Capitol Hill and Madison Park, the kind of place that served excellent espresso and minded its own business. I arrived 15 minutes early, claimed a corner table with good visibility of the entrance, and ordered a tea I wouldn't drink. My phone sat face down on the table recording. App ready but not yet started. I wanted everything documented, every word preserved, insurance against future denials or manipulations. My father walked in exactly at 6, wearing business casual instead of his usual suit, an attempt to appear approachable. He spotted me immediately, wound his way through the scattered tables, and sat down across from me without ordering anything. His expression was carefully neutral, giving nothing away. "You wanted to talk," he said. "So talk." I slid the folder across the table, the one containing sample documents from the storage unit, enough to make my point without revealing the full extent of what I had. He opened it slowly, his face unchanging as he looked at the property sale agreements, the forged signatures, the bank statements showing deposits that matched the sales. He took his time, reviewing each page methodically, and when he finally closed the folder his expression was still perfectly controlled. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice level. "That doesn't matter," I said. "What matters is I have all of it. Every property you sold, every forged document, every fraudulent transaction over the past 10 years. Grandpa Jimmy documented everything. He knew what you were doing and he made sure I'd have the evidence when I needed it." My father leaned back in his chair, studying me with the same calculating look he probably used in business negotiations. "What do you want?" "I want you to leave me alone," I said. "Withdraw the promissory note. Drop any plans to challenge my competency or my position as successor trustee. Transfer everything to me officially and walk away. Do that and this evidence stays private. Nobody sees it, nobody files charges, your reputation stays intact." He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the table, thinking through angles. "And if I refuse? Then I take everything to the prosecutor's office tomorrow morning," I said. "Wire fraud, forgery, theft. You'll be indicted within weeks. Your business will collapse, your reputation will be destroyed, and you'll spend the next decade fighting criminal charges. Is that really worth holding on to control of a trust you've already stolen millions from?" "You're bluffing," he said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. "You wouldn't destroy your own family." "Try me," I said, meeting his eyes. "You threw water at me. You tried to manipulate me into signing away my inheritance. You planned to have me declared mentally incompetent to cover up your crimes. You already destroyed this family. I'm just deciding whether to let everyone else know." His jaw tightened, anger flashing across his face before he controlled it. "You sound just like him," he said. "Your grandfather. Self-righteous, stubborn, convinced you're morally superior. He never understood what it took to build something real, to succeed in business. He just wanted to play the working class hero. He understood theft," I said. "He understood loyalty. He understood that family wasn't supposed to steal from each other. Everything you built on fraud. That's not success. That's crime." My father leaned forward, his voice dropping. "You think you're so much better than me? You think your little design business and your modest apartment make you noble? You're living off his money too. Every trust distribution you'll receive came from properties I managed, deals I made, work I did. The only difference is you're too naive to understand how the world actually works. I'm naive enough to think people shouldn't forge documents and steal millions of dollars," I said. "If that makes me naive, I'm comfortable with it." We sat in silence, the sounds of the coffee shop filtering around us, espresso machines hissing and quiet conversations blending into background noise. My father was thinking, calculating, trying to find an angle that gave him leverage. I could see the wheels turning, the strategist looking for weakness. You have 24 hours, I said, standing up and leaving the folder on the table. Tomorrow at 6 p.m. I want an email confirming you've withdrawn all claims and you're transferring the trustee position. If I don't receive it, I contact the prosecutor Wednesday morning. Choose carefully. I walked out without waiting for his response, my heart hammering but my steps steady. The hard part was done. I'd made the offer, shown the evidence, drawn the line. Now I had to wait and see if he valued his freedom more than his pride. The answer came not at 6 p.m. Tuesday, but at 11 a.m., in the form of my brother Brandon showing up at my apartment door. I saw him through the peephole, standing in the hallway with his hands in his pockets, looking uncomfortable. I opened the door but blocked the entrance. "What do you want, Brandon?" "Dad sent me," he said. "He wants to talk terms." I already gave him the terms, I said. 24 hours, then I go to the prosecutor. Nothing's changed. He thinks there's room for negotiation, Brandon said. He's willing to transfer the trustee position, but he wants assurances. Written guarantees that you'll never use the evidence, never mention what you found. Legal protections. He wants me to sign away my ability to report crimes he committed, I said. That's not happening. The deal is simple. He walks away, I stay quiet. But I'm not giving up my right to use the evidence if he comes after me again. Brandon shifted his weight, uncomfortable. He's not going to agree to that. He needs certainty. Then he can face the alternative, I said. I'm not negotiating. He made his choice when he started stealing from Grandpa Jimmy. Now he lives with the consequences or he faces criminal charges. Those are his options. My brother looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time, really seeing me, not just the little sister he could dismiss or ignore. You've changed, he said. You used to just accept whatever the family decided. I used to think family meant something, I said. Then you all showed me it doesn't. At least not the way you practice it. Now if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. Tell Dad the clock is still ticking. I closed the door before he could respond, leaned against it, and tried to calm my racing heart. They were testing me, trying to find weakness, looking for ways to maintain control even in defeat. But I'd learned from the best. Grandpa Jimmy had taught me patience, had shown me how to hold your ground when everyone else was trying to make you move. The rest of Tuesday crawled by in agonizing slowness, each hour feeling like 3. My phone silent except for work emails and a text from Vanessa asking for updates. I told her about Brandon's visit, about my father's attempt to renegotiate. She approved of my response, said holding firm was the right move, said men like my father respected strength more than flexibility. By 5 p.m. I was pacing my apartment, unable to focus on work, unable to do anything except watch the clock and wait. 6 p.m. came and went. No email, no message, nothing. I gave him until 7, then 8, telling myself he was just making me wait, just trying to maintain some illusion of control by being late. At 8:30 my phone finally rang. Not an email, a call, my father's name on the screen. I answered but said nothing, just waited. You win, he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. I'll transfer the trustee position. I'll withdraw the promissory note. I'll leave you alone. But understand something, Maya. You're dead to me after this. You and whatever relationship we had left, it's over. You're not my daughter anymore. We haven't been family for a long time, I said. You made sure of that. I'm just making it official. The email came through 10 minutes later, short and formal, written by his lawyer. Robert Chun hereby withdraws all claims against Maya Chun regarding familial financial obligations. Robert Chun confirms the transfer of successor trustee position for the James Chun Family Trust to Maya Chun, effective immediately. Robert Chun agrees to have no further contact with Maya Chun regarding estate matters or personal affairs. It was everything I'd demanded, stripped of warmth or humanity, but legally binding. I forwarded it to Vanessa, who confirmed it was legitimate, enforceable, exactly what we needed. You did it, she said when she called. You actually pulled it off. He's not fighting anymore. It's over. I wanted to feel relief or triumph or vindication. Instead I just felt tired, hollowed out, like I'd won a war but lost something I couldn't name. My family was gone. Not just distant but permanently severed. And even though they'd been toxic and cruel and manipulative, they were still the people I'd grown up with. The people who'd held me as a baby taught me to ride a bike, celebrated birthdays and holidays. That version of them was gone forever, replaced by strangers who valued money over everything. The following week brought paperwork and meetings with Mr. Thornton, the estate lawyer who'd handled my grandfather's affairs. He reviewed the trust documents, confirmed my position as successor trustee, and walked me through what that meant. 6 properties across Seattle, all held in trust, worth conservatively $15 million in current market value, plus investments, savings accounts, and a small stock portfolio. The total estate was worth nearly $18 million, all of it now under my control. Your grandfather was very specific about his wishes, Mr. Thornton said, reviewing notes from their final meetings. He wanted you to have full authority, no restrictions, no requirements to consult with other family members. He trusted your judgment completely. Did he tell you about my father? I asked. About the fraud? Mr. Thornton nodded slowly. He suspected something was wrong for years, but he didn't have proof until near the end. He hired a private investigator, gathered evidence, and made sure everything was documented. He was very concerned about protecting you. He knew your father would challenge the trust, try to maintain control. That's why he was so thorough. He wanted you to have every advantage. I spent the next month settling into my new role, learning property management, meeting with tenants, understanding the finances. The properties were all in working-class neighborhoods that had gentrified dramatically, meaning they generated substantial rental income while remaining affordable for long-term tenants. My grandfather had kept rents below market rates intentionally, prioritizing stable tenants over maximum profit. I decided to continue that approach, honoring his values even though it meant leaving money on the table. My father's attempts to sell the properties made more sense now. They represented millions in potential profit if sold to developers, but only if you didn't care about displacing the families who lived there, the communities that had been built around them. My father had seen dollar signs. My grandfather had seen people. I knew which approach I wanted to follow. The properties my father had already sold were more complicated. According to the law, those sales were fraudulent since he'd never had authority to sell trust assets. I could potentially sue to recover them, force the buyers to return the properties or pay fair value. But that meant litigation exposure, exactly what I'd promised to avoid if my father cooperated. Vanessa and I discussed options over coffee one Saturday morning, weighing justice against practicality. You could go after the properties, she said. The law is clearly on your side. Those sales were illegal. The buyers would have to return the assets or compensate the trust. But it would be public, messy, and expensive. And it would violate your agreement with your father, which means he could argue you broke the deal, I said. That all promises are off. Exactly, Vanessa confirmed. You'd probably still win, but it would drag out for years. Is it worth it? I thought about my grandfather's journal, about his focus on protecting me rather than punishing Robert. He'd had years to expose the fraud, to file charges, to seek revenge. Instead, he'd documented everything and waited, trusting that I'd use the information wisely rather than vindicatively. I think I let it go, I said. The trust still has 6 properties worth millions. I have more than enough to honor Grandpa Jimmy's wishes and build something meaningful. Going after the sold properties feels like revenge, not justice. Vanessa smiled. Your grandfather would be proud of that decision. He was never about punishment. He was about protection. Summer arrived with the kind of perfect Seattle weather that made everyone forget about the 9 months of rain, clear skies, and warm days that brought the city to life. I spent weekends visiting the properties, meeting tenants, learning their stories. Mrs. Nguyen in the Beacon Hill house who'd lived there 30 years and raised 4 children. The Martinez family in Georgetown who ran a small restaurant and lived above it. College students sharing the Columbia City house, splitting rent and building friendships. Each property held lives, stories, communities that my grandfather had quietly protected. I started making plans, real plans for the future instead of just surviving. One property had commercial space on the ground floor, currently vacant. I decided to convert it into a community art studio, offering affordable workspace for local artists, the kind of place I wished I'd had access to when I was starting out. Another property had a large backyard that was barely used. I worked with the tenants to convert it into a community garden, raised beds and fruit trees, and shared space. Small changes but meaningful ones, Ways to honor my grandfather's values while building something new. My mother reached out once 3 months after everything settled. A text message that said simply, "I heard you're doing good things with the properties. I'm glad." I didn't respond, not because I was angry, but because I didn't know what to say. The distance between us had become permanent, comfortable even. We were strangers who used to know each other, and that was okay. Brandon I never heard from, which was fine. We'd never been close anyway, just siblings by accident rather than choice. My father existed somewhere in the city, running his business, living his life, but we occupied completely separate worlds now. Occasionally I'd see Chan and associate signs on development projects, evidence he was still building his empire. But I didn't pay attention, didn't care. His success or failure was no longer connected to mine. I was building something different, something that wouldn't collapse under scrutiny or crumble when examined too closely. 6 months after taking over the trust, I hosted a small gathering at my apartment, inviting people who'd helped me through the transition. Vanessa, Mr. Thornton, Marcus, who'd held on to evidence backups, a few tenants who'd become friends, people who'd shown me what community actually meant when family failed. We ate Thai food and drank cheap wine and told stories, and someone asked if I missed my family, if I regretted how things turned out. I thought about it honestly before answering. I miss the idea of them, I said. I miss having people who are supposed to care about you unconditionally. But the actual people, the ones who threw water at me and tried to steal my inheritance and planned to have me declared incompetent? No, I don't miss them. I'm better without them. And that wasn't sad anymore. It was just true. That night, after everyone left and I was cleaning up paper plates and wine glasses, I found the journal my grandfather had left in the storage unit. I'd read it multiple times since finding it, but one entry kept drawing me back, the final one written weeks before his death. Maya will face a choice, he'd written, between revenge and rebuilding, between destroying them and creating something better. I hope I've taught her well enough that she chooses creation. The world has enough destruction. It needs builders. I set the journal down, looked around my small apartment that had become home in ways my childhood house never was, thought about the properties and the tenants and the community studio that would open next month. I'd made my choice, and Grandpa Jimmy had been right. Building felt better than destroying. Creating felt better than revenge. The file box still sat in my closet, evidence preserved but unused, a reminder that I had power I'd chosen not to wield. Sometimes power was about what you didn't do, about the restraint you showed, about knowing you could destroy someone but choosing not to. That was the real inheritance my grandfather had left me. Not the money or the properties or the trust documents. The understanding that strength came from knowing who you were, what you valued, what you were willing to fight for, and what you were willing to let go. I'd lost my family, but I'd gained myself. And that was worth more than any inheritance, any property, any amount of money they could have offered. I was Maya Chan, granddaughter of James Chan, builder of communities and protector of the values that actually mattered. And for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The rain returned in October as it always did, washing the city clean and settling into the familiar rhythm of Pacific Northwest autumn. I stood at the window of my apartment, watching water stream down glass, and felt something close to peace. My phone buzzed with a message from a tenant asking about a repair, normal life continuing in its normal way. I responded, grabbed my jacket, and headed out to handle it. Just another day in the life I'd built, one small decision at a time. The community art studio opened on a Saturday in late November, gray skies threatening rain but holding off just long enough for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. I'd invited everyone who'd helped make it happen, the contractors who'd renovated the space, the artists who'd given input on the layout, the neighborhood residents who'd shown up to planning meetings and offered suggestions. Mrs. Nguyen brought homemade spring rolls, the Martinez family contributed tamales, and someone set up a folding table with coffee and pastries from the bakery down the street. It wasn't fancy, nothing like the polished events my father used to host for his development projects, but it felt real in a way those never had. The studio itself was bright and open, high ceilings with skylights I'd installed to maximize natural light, walls painted white and ready for whatever art would eventually cover them. Individual workspaces lined one side, each with a desk and storage, affordable monthly rentals for artists who needed dedicated space. The other side was left open for classes and workshops, community events, and collaborative projects. Everything was scaled to accessibility rather than profit, Prices set to cover costs and maintenance but nothing more. A local journalist showed up. Someone from a neighborhood blog who'd heard about the project and wanted to cover it. She interviewed me while people explored the space, asking about my vision and what inspired the studio. I told her about my grandfather, about inheriting properties and wanting to use them in ways that honored his values, about believing that communities needed spaces for creativity just as much as they needed housing and businesses. She scribbled notes and asked follow-up questions, and I realized partway through that I was talking about legacy, about the difference between building things that lasted and building things that just made money. My grandfather had understood that distinction. He'd built houses that families lived in for generations, had maintained properties because people needed homes, not because real estate was an investment opportunity. The studio was my attempt to continue that approach, to create something that served the community rather than extracting value from it. The journalist seemed genuinely interested, asked for photos, and promised to publish the story within a week. I didn't think much of it until the article went live, and suddenly my phone was flooded with messages. The story had resonated beyond the neighborhood blog, getting picked up by larger Seattle publications, and eventually making it to local television news. The narrative was apparently compelling. Young woman inherits millions from grandfather, uses it to create community spaces instead of maximizing profit, chooses values over wealth. I hadn't thought of it that way, hadn't considered that what I was doing was unusual enough to be newsworthy, but apparently in a city increasingly defined by tech wealth and skyrocketing housing costs, the idea of someone actively choosing community over profit was noteworthy. The attention was uncomfortable at first, reporters reaching out for interviews, people I barely knew sending congratulations, strangers recognizing me at coffee shops and wanting to talk about the properties or the studio or my grandfather. I wasn't used to visibility, had spent most of my life trying to stay small and invisible, and suddenly being noticed felt exposing. But it also brought opportunities. Other property owners reached out asking for advice about community-oriented development. Nonprofit organizations wanted to partner on affordable housing initiatives. Artists from across the city applied for studio spaces, their portfolios and proposals filling my inbox with creativity and ambition. Vanessa called 3 days after the television segment aired, her voice mixing amusement with concern. "You're famous now," she said. "How does it feel?" "Weird, I admit it. I just wanted to open a studio. I didn't expect all this attention." "That's because you're doing something genuine," she said. "In a city full of people talking about community impact while building luxury condos, you're actually following through. People notice authenticity. Just be careful," she added, her tone shifting. "Fame attracts attention, and not all of it will be positive. Your family might see these stories. They might have opinions about what you're doing with the properties. Let them have opinions," I said. "The trust is legally mine." They gave up any say when they walked away. "I know," Vanessa said. "I'm just saying stay vigilant. Your father doesn't like losing, and seeing you succeed where he failed might sting enough that he tries something." I promised I'd be careful, but privately I wasn't worried. 6 months had passed since our confrontation. Half a year of silence and distance that felt permanent. My father had his life, I had mine, and there was no reason for those worlds to collide anymore. I was wrong about that, but I wouldn't know it for another 3 weeks. December brought the kind of cold rain that Seattle did best, relentless and gray, turning the city into watercolor impressions of itself. I spent most days working from the studio now, having converted one of the workspaces into a small office where I could manage the properties and handle administrative work, while still being present for the artists who were slowly filling the space. The community was building organically, painters and sculptors and photographers who appreciated the affordable rent and supportive environment. They collaborated on projects, gave each other feedback, organized informal critique sessions that sometimes lasted late into the evening. It reminded me of what I'd hoped college would be: creative people supporting each other rather than competing, building something together rather than trying to succeed individually. One evening in mid-December, I was locking up the studio when a man approached from across the street, middle-aged and wearing an expensive coat, the kind of careful presentation that suggested business rather than art. He introduced himself as Richard Caldwell, senior partner at a development firm, and said he wanted to discuss a potential opportunity. "I'm not interested in selling," I said immediately, assuming that was the pitch. He smiled, the practiced expression of someone used to objections. I'm not here to buy. I'm here to propose a partnership. Your properties are in prime locations, neighborhoods with significant development potential. We could work together. Maximize the value while still maintaining your community focus. Affordable units on lower floors, market rate on upper floors. Everyone benefits. I've heard this pitch before, I said. It always ends with displacement and luxury condos. We're different, he insisted. We specialize in mixed-use development, genuine affordability, not just the minimum required by zoning codes. We could turn your properties into models for how development should work. I'm not interested, I repeated. The properties are fine as they are. They're serving the community effectively without redevelopment. He handed me a business card anyway. Think about it. The city is growing, property values are increasing. You could do a lot of good with the kind of resources a development partnership would generate. Plus, he added with a knowing look, I understand your family has experience in real estate development. Perhaps they could advise you on the benefits of maximizing asset potential. I stared at him, understanding clicking into place. My father sent you, I said flatly. Caldwell's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes confirmed it. Robertson is a respected colleague, he said carefully. When he mentioned you might be interested in exploring development opportunities, I thought it was worth a conversation. Tell him I'm not interested, I said, handing the card back. Tell him the properties aren't for sale, aren't for development, and aren't any of his business anymore. And tell him if he sends anyone else to pressure me, I'll consider it a violation of our agreement and act accordingly. I walked away before Caldwell could respond, my hands shaking with anger I tried to control. 6 months of silence and my father was still trying to manipulate me, still trying to control assets he'd given up any right to, still convinced he could find an angle that would give him leverage. I called Vanessa from my car, explained what had happened. She swore creatively and promised to send a cease and desist letter to both Caldwell and my father, making clear that any further attempts to interfere with the trust would result in immediate legal action. Do you want me to threaten to release the fraud evidence? She asked. Make it clear what happens if he keeps pushing? Not yet, I said. Let's try the formal warning first. But if he doesn't back off, then yes, we remind him what I'm still holding. The cease and desist worked, at least temporarily. No more developers approached me, no more business cards from colleagues of my father. But the attempted interference reminded me that the distance I'd built wasn't necessarily permanent, that my father was still out there, still watching, still looking for opportunities to reassert control. I doubled down on documentation, kept meticulous records of every decision I made regarding the properties, every expense and improvement and tenant interaction. If my father ever tried to challenge my management of the trust, I wanted an unassailable record showing I was acting responsibly and in accordance with my grandfather's wishes. Christmas approached, my first holiday season completely disconnected from family. Previous years I'd at least received a token text message from my mother, some brief acknowledgement that we'd once been related. This year there was nothing, just silence that felt both liberating and lonely. I spent Christmas Eve at the studio, helping organize a community dinner where anyone in the neighborhood could come for free food and company. Artists contributed decorations, local restaurants donated supplies, and we set up long tables in the open workspace and invited everyone we could think of who might not have somewhere to go for the holiday. Nearly 60 people showed up, a mix of tenants from my properties, local residents, artists from the studio, people who'd just seen flyers and wanted to participate. Mrs. Nguyen taught a group of teenagers how to fold paper decorations. The Martinez family served tamales and told stories about Christmas traditions in Mexico. Someone set up a speaker and played music that ranged from traditional carols to jazz to indie rock. It was chaotic and loud and imperfect, nothing like the carefully staged holiday events my mother used to host, and it was exactly what I needed. This was family, I realized. Not the people you were born to, but the people you chose, the community you built through shared values and mutual support. These were people who showed up because they wanted to, not because obligation or social expectation demanded it. They were here because we'd created something together, a space and a community that felt worth celebrating. Late in the evening, after most people had left and a few of us were cleaning up, Marcus pulled me aside and handed me a small wrapped box. Early Christmas present, he said. You've earned it. Inside was a brass nameplate, the kind you'd mount on a door or desk, engraved with simple text. Maya Chun, Trustee, James Chun Family Trust. Underneath in smaller letters, Builder of Communities. I felt tears sting my eyes, unexpected and genuine. This is perfect, I managed to say. Thank you. You've done something real, Marcus said. Something your grandfather would be proud of. That matters more than any inheritance or property value. Keep building. I mounted the nameplate in my studio office the next day, positioning it where I'd see it every morning when I sat down to work. A reminder of who I was, what I was building, why it mattered. The new year arrived with the usual Seattle rain, the city settling into winter rhythms of gray skies and early darkness. I established routines, visiting each property weekly to check on maintenance issues and talk with tenants, spending mornings managing administrative work and afternoons at the studio, attending community meetings and planning sessions for neighborhood improvements. The work was constant but satisfying, the kind of meaningful engagement I'd never found in my previous life trying to build a design business while avoiding my family. I was building something bigger than myself now, something that would outlast me, something that honored the man who'd trusted me with this responsibility. In February, nearly a year after my grandfather's death and 10 months since the confrontation with my father, I received an unexpected letter. Not email, but an actual physical letter, delivered through the mail in a cream envelope with my name handwritten across the front. The return address was a law office I didn't recognize, and my first instinct was suspicion. I opened it carefully, half expecting some new legal threat or manipulation. Instead, I found a letter from my mother, dated 2 weeks earlier. Maya, it began, no greeting, just my name. I've been thinking about what to say to you for months now, and I've realized there are no words that adequately express what I need to say. So I'll just be direct. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for throwing water at you. I'm sorry for supporting your father's attempts to manipulate you into signing away your inheritance. I'm sorry for choosing loyalty to him over protection of you. I'm sorry for all the years before that, the ways we made you feel unwelcome in your own family, the times we criticized your choices instead of supporting your dreams. I'm sorry for not being the mother you deserved. The letter continued for 2 pages, outlining specific regrets and acknowledging harms I'd almost forgotten about, small cruelties that had accumulated over years into a wall of distance. She wrote about recognizing her own complicity, about how she'd enabled my father's controlling behavior because it was easier than confronting him, about how watching me build something meaningful with the properties had forced her to examine what she'd valued and what she'd sacrificed to maintain her lifestyle. I'm not asking for forgiveness, she wrote near the end. I know I don't deserve it. I'm not asking to be part of your life again. I just wanted you to know that I see what you've accomplished, I understand what you've built, and I'm genuinely proud of you in a way I never expressed when it would have mattered. Your grandfather was right to trust you. You're doing exactly what he hoped you would. The letter ended with her signature. Nothing more. No phone number or invitation to respond. Just an apology sent into the void, not expecting anything in return. I read it 3 times, sitting at my desk in the studio, trying to untangle the complicated emotions it stirred up. Part of me wanted to dismiss it, to see it as another manipulation, too little too late. But part of me recognized something genuine in the words, something that felt like real accountability rather than performance. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I tucked the letter into the journal my grandfather had left me. Another piece of the complicated story of family and inheritance and choosing who you become. Maybe someday I'd reach out to my mother. Maybe someday there'd be space for some kind of relationship built on honesty instead of obligation. But that day wasn't today. Today I had properties to manage, tenants to support, a community to build. The personal stuff could wait. Spring arrived gradually, the way it always did in Seattle. Rain giving way to longer days and occasional sun. Cherry blossoms exploding across the city in bursts of pink and white. The studio celebrated its 6-month anniversary with an open house, showcasing work from the resident artists, hosting demonstrations and workshops, inviting the community to see what we'd built. The turnout exceeded every expectation, people flooding the space throughout the afternoon, appreciating art and asking questions and expressing interest in similar projects in their own neighborhoods. By the end of the day, I was exhausted but energized, reminded of why this work mattered, why choosing community over profit was worth the complications. That evening, after everyone had left and I was doing final cleanup, someone knocked on the studio door. I considered ignoring it, ready to be done for the day, but something made me check. Through the glass I saw an older woman, maybe 70s, wearing a practical jacket and carrying a canvas bag. I unlocked the door and she smiled warmly. "Maya-chan?" she asked, and when I nodded she continued. "I'm Dorothy Harrison. I knew your grandfather." My heart jumped, but I kept my expression neutral. "Please come in." We sat in the open workspace, surrounded by lingering traces of the open house, and Dorothy pulled a worn photo album from her canvas bag. "Your grandfather and my late husband were friends for over 40 years, she said, opening the album to show black and white photos of two young men in work clothes, standing in front of a partially built house. They started their contracting businesses around the same time, helped each other through the early years, stayed close even as their lives took different directions. I studied the photos, seeing my grandfather young and strong, full of the energy and determination that must have driven him to build everything he accomplished. Dorothy turned pages slowly, showing the progression of time, photos of the men with families at birthday parties at construction sites, always together, always supporting each other. "My husband passed 5 years ago," Dorothy continued. "Cancer like your grandfather. Before he died, he made me promise to give you something if I ever got the chance." She pulled an envelope from the album, similar to the ones my grandfather had left me, and handed it across. "Jimmy asked David to hold this in case something happened before he could give it to you himself. David held on to it all these years, and now I'm passing it along like he wanted." I opened the envelope carefully, finding a single page in my grandfather's handwriting. Maya read, "If you're reading this, it means Dorothy found you, which means I'm gone. I'm writing this as insurance, one more message in case the others don't reach you, in case your father finds ways to destroy what I've left behind. I want you to know that everything I did, every property I bought, every decision I made about the trust, was because I saw something in you that reminded me of who I was before I learned to compromise. You had integrity when you were 7 years old, making sure every kid at school got a turn on the swings. You had courage when you were 15, standing up for a classmate being bullied even though it cost you friendships. You had vision when you chose art over business school, when you picked meaning over money. Those qualities are rare, Maya. I wanted to make sure you had resources to build something with them, something that reflected your values rather than being forced to compromise because of economic pressure." The letter continued, offering advice about managing the properties, warnings about challenges I might face, encouragement for moments when the work felt overwhelming. His words were practical and loving in equal measure, the guidance of someone who'd lived long enough to understand what mattered and wanted to pass that wisdom along. The final paragraph made my throat tight. "You're going to be tempted to use the inheritance to prove something to your father, to show him you can be successful on your own terms. Don't fall into that trap. Build for yourself, for the community, for the values you believe in. His approval or disapproval is irrelevant. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. Just be who you are. Do work that matters and trust that it's enough. Because it is. You are enough exactly as you are." I folded the letter carefully, tucked it back into the envelope and looked at Dorothy. "Thank you for bringing this. It means everything." "Your grandfather was a good man," Dorothy said. "He loved you very much. Whatever you're building here," she gestured around the studio, "he would have been so proud." After she left, I sat alone in the studio, holding the letter, feeling the weight and gift of my grandfather's love across the distance of death. He'd planned for every contingency, left messages in multiple places, made sure I'd have guidance and support no matter what obstacles appeared. That kind of foresight, that depth of care, was its own inheritance, more valuable than any property or trust fund. Summer arrived with the perfect weather that made everyone remember why they tolerated 9 months of rain, long days and warm evenings that brought the city to life. The studio thrived, operating at full capacity with a waiting list of artists hoping for space. The properties remained stable, tenants happy, maintenance current, communities building around each location. I'd found a rhythm, a way of working that felt sustainable rather than overwhelming, meaningful rather than obligatory. One evening in July, I received a text from an unknown number. "This is Brandon. Can we talk?" I stared at the message for several minutes, debating whether to respond. My brother and I hadn't spoken since he'd shown up at my apartment trying to negotiate terms for our father. Nearly a year had passed, an entire cycle of seasons, and I'd grown comfortable with his absence. But curiosity won, the way it always seemed to with my family. I agreed to meet him at a neutral location, a park near Green Lake where we could walk and talk without the pressure of sitting across a table staring at each other. He was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench overlooking the water, wearing jeans and a casual shirt instead of his usual business attire. He looked different, I realized as I approached. Tired, maybe, or uncertain, lacking the confidence that usually defined him. "Thanks for meeting me," he said as I sat down, leaving space between us. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," I admitted. "What do you want, Brandon?" He was quiet for a moment, watching ducks paddle across the lake. "I wanted to apologize," he said finally, "for how we treated you, for going along with Dad's plans, for not standing up when I should have. You were my little sister and I let them throw water at you. I let them try to destroy you. That's not who I want to be." "What changed?" I asked. "A year ago you were fine with all of it." "A lot of things," he said. "Watching you succeed with the properties while Dad's business struggles. Seeing the community work you're doing compared to the luxury developments he builds. Realizing that maybe Grandpa was right, maybe there are more important things than maximizing profit." He turned to look at me directly. "Dad's company is in trouble. The development market is cooling. Several projects are over budget. Investors are getting nervous. He's been cutting corners, taking risks, doing exactly what Grandpa always warned against. I've been watching him become someone I don't respect, and it made me think about who I want to be. I'm trying to decide if I believe you," I said. "If this is genuine or if it's another angle, another way to get access to the trust or the properties." "It's genuine," Brandon said. "I'm not asking for anything, Maya. I'm not trying to get access to what Grandpa left you. I just wanted you to know that I see what you've built, I understand why he chose you, and I'm sorry for being part of what tried to tear it down." We sat in silence for a while, watching the lake, the evening sun turning the water gold. I didn't forgive him, not entirely, but I appreciated the apology, recognized it as potentially genuine. Maybe someday there'd be space for rebuilding some kind of relationship with my brother, something built on honesty instead of family obligation. But like with my mother's letter, that day wasn't today. "I have to go," I said eventually, standing. "But thank you for apologizing. It matters, even if I'm not ready to do anything with it yet." "That's fair," Brandon said. He handed me a business card with a personal email address written on the back. "If you ever want to talk, I'm here. No agenda, no pressure. Just if you want to." I took the card, tucked it into my pocket, and walked away. The sun was setting as I drove back to Capitol Hill, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reflected off the glass towers of downtown. The city was beautiful in that light, full of possibility and complexity, home in ways that had nothing to do with family and everything to do with choice. Fall arrived, the first anniversary of taking control of the trust, a full year of building and learning and discovering what it meant to be responsible for something bigger than myself. I marked the occasion quietly, having dinner with Vanessa and Marcus and a few of the artists from the studio, people who'd become my chosen family, who showed up because they wanted to rather than because they had to. We ate at a small restaurant in Ballard, near the house my grandfather had built, the neighborhood he'd called home for 50 years. After dinner I walked to the house alone, standing across the street, looking at the lit windows and the family inside. Strangers now, tenants who rented the space and built their lives there. The house looked happy, if buildings could look happy, well maintained and loved, serving the purpose it was built for. That's what my grandfather had wanted, I realized. Not monuments to his success or legacy projects with his name carved in stone. Just spaces where people could live and create and build community. Places that served rather than extracted. I'd spent a year trying to honor that vision, and I thought maybe I was succeeding. The properties were stable, the tenants were happy, the community studio was thriving. I hadn't maximized profit or pursued aggressive development or done anything my father would consider smart business. But I'd built something real, something sustainable, something that made the city a little bit better. My phone buzzed with a message from Vanessa. The prosecutor's office called today. They got an anonymous tip about real estate fraud and wanted to know if I had information about Robert Shen. I stared at the message, understanding flooding through me. Someone had reported my father, triggered an investigation that had nothing to do with me. The evidence I'd held for a year, the leverage I'd chosen not to use, might become irrelevant if prosecutors pursued their own case. I called Vanessa immediately. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing," she said. I told them I'd need to consult with my client before discussing any potential evidence. But Maya, if they're investigating, they're going to find things. Your father's fraud wasn't subtle. There are records, paper trails, forged documents. If they look closely, they'll build a case with or without your help. Do I have to cooperate? I asked. Can I just stay out of it? You're not obligated to volunteer information, Vanessa said. But if they subpoena you, if they ask direct questions under oath, you'll have to be truthful. You can't lie to protect him, and you can't hide evidence of crimes if they specifically request it. So it might come out anyway, I said. Everything I've been holding, everything I chose not to use, might become public through an investigation I didn't start. Exactly, Vanessa confirmed. The question is, do you want to cooperate voluntarily or wait and see what happens? If you cooperate, you have some control over the narrative, you can explain your position. If you wait for a subpoena, you're just responding to their questions with no context. I thought about my grandfather, about the journal entries documenting his son's fraud, about how he'd gathered evidence but never used it, trusting me to make the right choice. He'd wanted me to have the option, the power to defend myself if necessary. But he'd also trusted my judgment about when and how to use it. This investigation wasn't my choice, wasn't my action. Someone else had triggered it. Someone else had decided Robertson deserved to face consequences. Maybe that freed me from the responsibility of being the one who destroyed him. Maybe that gave me permission to simply tell the truth without bearing the weight of revenge. I'll cooperate, I told Vanessa. If they ask, I'll provide the evidence. I'll explain what I found, what my grandfather documented, why he gathered it. But I'll also make clear that I wasn't pursuing charges, that I was trying to protect myself rather than punish him. Can you set up a meeting? Vanessa promised she would, and 3 days later I sat in a conference room at the King County Prosecutor's office, facing 2 attorneys and a financial crimes investigator, walking them through everything I'd found in the storage unit. They took notes, asked clarifying questions, requested copies of documents I'd brought. Their expressions remained professionally neutral, but I could see the interest, the recognition that this was significant evidence supporting their broader investigation. One of the attorneys, a woman named Sarah Chun, no relation, leaned forward. This is extremely helpful, Ms. Chun. Can you tell us why you didn't come forward with this evidence sooner? I wanted to protect myself without destroying my family, I said honestly. My father agreed to leave me alone, to withdraw his claims to the trust. In exchange, I kept the evidence private. I wasn't trying to help him avoid consequences. I was just trying to move forward with my life. That's understandable, the investigator said. But you should know this investigation will likely result in criminal charges. The evidence you've provided, combined with what we've already uncovered, paints a clear picture of systematic fraud. Your father will face serious consequences. I nodded, feeling the weight of that reality settle over me. Part of me felt guilty, like I was betraying family by cooperating. But a larger part felt relief, like I was finally unburdening myself of secrets I'd been carrying too long. Whatever happened next wasn't my responsibility. I told the truth, provided evidence of crimes I didn't commit, and let the system determine what justice looked like. The investigation moved forward over the following months, largely without my involvement. Prosecutors subpoenaed documents, interviewed witnesses, built their case methodically. I heard through Vanessa that my father had hired expensive lawyers, that he was fighting the charges, that he'd offered plea deals that were rejected. The case would go to trial probably sometime next year, a public reckoning for crimes he'd committed systematically over a decade. My mother reached out once during this period, a brief email saying she understood I'd cooperated with prosecutors, and she didn't blame me. Your father made his choices, she wrote. You're just being honest about what happened. That's not betrayal. That's integrity. I appreciated the message but didn't respond. We'd reached a place of mutual understanding, if not reconciliation. She'd acknowledged her failures. I'd accepted her apology without rebuilding relationship, and we both moved forward in our separate lives. That seemed enough. Winter returned, the cycle completing, 2 years since my grandfather's death and 18 months. Since I'd taken control of the trust, the studio had expanded into an adjacent space, doubling our capacity. The properties remained stable, communities thriving around each location. I'd started a small foundation using trust income, supporting other community-oriented projects across the city, trying to extend my grandfather's values beyond just the properties he'd owned. I was happy, I realized one evening, sitting in my studio office, reviewing applications for foundation grants. Actually happy, not just content or surviving, but genuinely satisfied with my life and work. I'd built something meaningful, created community where there'd been isolation, turned inheritance into impact. The studio door opened and Mrs. Nguyen came in, carrying a wrapped plate. "I made extra dumplings," she said, setting them on my desk. "You need to eat something. You work too much." I laughed, accepted the food gratefully. "Thank you, Mrs. Nguyen. You take good care of me." "You're a good girl," she said, patting my shoulder. "Like your grandfather. He would be proud of you." After she left, I unwrapped the dumplings, still warm, and thought about legacy, about the different ways we leave marks on the world. My father had built towers and developments, structures with his name on them, monuments to success measured in square footage and property values. My grandfather had built houses and community, spaces where people lived and grew, legacy measured in lives touched and families supported. I was trying to build something that honored the second approach, that valued impact over recognition, community over profit, meaning over monument. The brass nameplate on my desk caught the light, reflecting back the words "builder of communities." That's who I'd become, who I'd chosen to be when given the resources and freedom to decide. Not the daughter my parents wanted, not the heir to a real estate empire, not someone defined by family expectation or social pressure. Just Maya Chun, doing work that mattered, building things that would outlast her, honoring the man who trusted her with the opportunity to make that choice. Outside the studio windows, Seattle settled into evening, lights coming on across the city, rain beginning to fall in the gentle, persistent way that defined this place. Somewhere out there my father was preparing for trial, facing consequences for choices he'd made. Somewhere my mother was rebuilding her life without him, figuring out who she was independent of his success. Somewhere my brother was deciding what kind of person he wanted to become. They were all on their own journeys, dealing with their own consequences, and I'd finally learned that wasn't my responsibility. I was responsible for my own choices, my own path, my own definition of success. Everything else was just noise, distraction from the real work of building a life worth living. I finished the dumplings, sent a quick thank you text to Mrs. Nguyen, and returned to reviewing grant applications. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new moments to choose who I wanted to be. But tonight I was exactly where I needed to be, doing exactly what mattered, building exactly what my grandfather had trusted me to build. And that was more than enough. It was everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.